Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to our fifth and final series of the SharePoint webinars. There's a hole in my bucket and thank you to all of you if you've actually made it to all five of our webinars. It's much appreciated. As ever, we are joined by our senior SharePoint specialist, Tony Hughes, and those of you who've been with us for the rest of the series will have noticed or will be familiar with either myself and or Stephen Green running the administrative part of the webinar. So my name's Will, and I will be helping keep the ship on a straight and narrow course. So as we've explained in our throughout the series of events that we've done, we've looked at varying elements of SharePoint, and this is going to be a slightly different approach, a bit flying on the seat of our pants. We're going to be creating a SharePoint site from scratch based on the feedback and comments that many of you who have been on previous webinars have put to us, which Tony will be doing. You'll see there, so we've already had 4 webinars, and all of these webinars are recorded, so if you miss anything or feel afterwards that one of your colleagues would probably benefit from watching this, then we will be putting this webinar up online as well, and that's on the tsg.com website. You'll all receive an email from me shortly after the webinar has finished or tomorrow with details of how to get there. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Tony, who will take us through the webinar. Again, just a reminder, the link you'll see there is where you can see all of the recordings from previous webinars, the previous 4, and the 5th one, today's, will also be up on there as well. So, look forward to an informative morning. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you can and keep Tony on his toes. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Tony, and we'll deal with questions as and when they come. Right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. Good morning, everybody. Just a few slides to go through, just as a reminder. What we've been trying to demonstrate over the last 4 weeks is really about how we can use SharePoint to build efficiencies in the business, help reduce risk by making our processes more compliant, how we can apply more control, but also maintain flexibility so at the end of the day we can all still do our day jobs. And again, just if we can keep in mind the 3 I's, this idea we've got around SharePoint is saying, well, look at the issues in your organization, use your imagination, and hopefully that will result in improvements. We've had a few ideas about what people would like to see built inside SharePoint today. So what we've done is we've taken 2 of these requests, which I'm actually going to show solutions around. Another request was in regard to the use of SharePoint in education, and the person who submitted that question asked if we could actually show any applications which we've developed in education. Now, unfortunately, because of sort of data protection, we're not actually able to log on to any client servers. But I just want to cover this a little bit now, which is yes, SharePoint is used heavily in education. In effect, right away from sort of primary, secondary, and further education. One of our local universities in the northeast here, Northumbria University, are actually in the early stages of a massive SharePoint deployment for use by staff, lecturers, and students, and that will have in excess of 30,000 users per annum. And it's going to be used for a variety of things, business-related functions like incident management, things like that. But it's also going to be developed as the tool by which students submit coursework and interact with their lecturers and fellow students. Probably over, which pub are we going to go to tonight? If it's anything like my son, who's at Northumbria University at the moment. But we also have a secondary school. That secondary school is actually the school which my daughter goes to, who's currently starting her GCSE exams this week, so she's fairly stressed. But they use SharePoint as a virtual learning environment. So they have sort of, curriculum sites, class sites, etc., etc. And I can also log on to that and check what homework's been allocated to my daughter and things like that. So it is getting used in education, and we also have an academy in Teesside who are using SharePoint to manage the process around school visits. So if they go down to Flamingo Land for the day, for those who are not in the northeast, that's a sort of a theme park in Yorkshire, or if they go across to Spain on a Spanish trip, anything like that, they're using SharePoint to make sure that they do the necessary risk assessments, that they have all of the authorization letters from parents and anything to do with medical conditions and dietary requirements, etc., etc. And Microsoft are very, very keen on getting SharePoint into the education sector, so that when people come out of secondary school into employment or universities, they're familiar with this sort of environment, so they can bring those ideas into the business. So that was a little bit about on education. If anyone does want to discuss that in more detail, following the webinars, then you drop us an email. I'm quite happy to come and visit people or have telephone conversations, etc., etc. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is around tender management. Now, what I've actually done earlier today, just to save a bit of time, is sort of set up a SharePoint site with some functionality around tender management. Now, it's using a function in SharePoint called document sets. It's not something we've covered in previous webinars, but basically a document set is a function in SharePoint which allows you to group together documents within a particular document library. So in the past, when we've looked at document libraries, if I open up my tender supporting documents, which is just a document library, all we've been doing here is dropping in documents, and then maybe adding relevant metadata such as next review date, department, what type of document it is, etc., etc. And on the new button, we've had the option to say Word, Excel, or like I mentioned in the previous webinar, these could be customized to draw in particular templates. If we start using document sets, then we have the ability to say, okay, well, within this document library, which I've got called tenders, if I hit new, I get an option called tender pack. So I've configured a document set called tender pack, okay, which can be used as the start point for managing the documents for a particular tender. I just want to drop into the site settings just to show you how we can configure a document set. So down here underneath SharePoint month, I've got this document set called tender pack, and these are the settings for them. I'm not going to go through all of the settings, just really the main the sort of the main aspects of it. Within a document set, we can define data fields. So what I've done here is said, right, well, when I create a new tender pack, I want to have the title, the description, the client name, the submission date, contract value, and stage, etc. These aren't related to the documents within the document set. It's actually metadata assigned with the tender pack, or that's the name of my document set. But if we look in the document set settings, one thing we can do is actually say, well, when I create a new tender pack, pull in some standard documents by default. So what I've done here is said, right, well, when we do a tender, ordinarily that tender is going to ask us for our audited accounts. It might ask us for our environmental policy or our health and safety policy or our quality statement. So what I've done in effect is bound those documents to the tender pack. Okay, and what we can also do is we can add particular fields onto what's called the welcome page within the document set. Okay, so if I go back to my tenders document library and I say, right, I've got a new tender come in, I can say, right, I want to create a new tender pack. For some reason I've had to do this twice every time this morning. There we go. So we can say, well, what's the name of the tender? So let's just say this is the refurbishment of TSG Basingstoke office. You know, we can put a little description in there if need be. We could say this is a full refit of a 2-story building. We can say who's the client name, and obviously all these fields are configurable. When do we have to submit this by? So we can say, well, we need to submit it by the 31st of July. If we've got an indication as to what the contract value is, we might say, well, we think it's about £250,000. And I've just got some various stages on here. So I'm just going to say, well, that's logged. So that'll go away and just create me a tender pack, refurbishment of TSG Basingstoke office, client name TSG, submission date, contract value, etc. We can have more fields on there, but what you'll notice as well is that it's actually pulled in some default documentation as well, ready for that. Okay. So if I just go back to my tenders, then there's me refurbishment of TSG Basingstoke. So I'll click on that, and then it just opens it. Okay, and then within here I've got the ability, you know, to say, well, okay, well, I want to create a new, you know, a new Word document, the same as we've seen previously, or we can upload documents. So if I've already got, for instance, oops, that wasn't what I wanted to see. Did you get my? I need to see show desktop, don't I? No, sorry, technical issue. Will's taken over. I've clicked the wrong button. That's what. There we go. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to create a new Word document. Oh, there it is down there. So we'll just say this is TSG Basingstoke RFI. I'll just put a little bit of information in that. Close that off. Okay, and then I can, if I want to, just drag that document in there. And then that will then be added to that document set or tender pack, as I called it. And then we've got all the standard functionality where we can go in there and say, right, well, I just want to edit in the browser. You know, phase 1, which is demolition. See my caps locks as it's usually. You know, phase 2, refit, etc. Okay, so all I've done is in effect just create a pack, a tender pack, which I can use to manage all the documentation for a particular tender. If I wanted to within here, I could create subfolders, so I might say, emails from client, and I could just drop different documents in there if I wanted. Okay. And obviously within this environment, we can still use all of the version control, check-in, check-out, etc. As provided by a standard SharePoint document library. But what we're doing is, in effect, we're grouping them together, and we're also giving some metadata around it. Okay. So we've got refurbishment of TSG Basingstoke office. If I flick through here, then I've got it shown on a calendar as well. Okay, so even though we're looking at a document set within, or document sets rather, within a document library, because on there I put a submission date, it allows me to create a calendar based upon that information. What I've done as well is this calendar is only showing entries which we haven't in effect declined as far as a status. So if I was to come in here and say, well, I want to just edit the properties of this and say we've declined that, and I do a save, then you can see it. Well, if I go back out to June, it's now disappeared off the calendar. Okay. So if I put that back on there and say, well, it's in progress, and if we go back to June, then we can still see it's July, sorry, getting ahead of myself according to Will, and then we can see it's in progress. Okay, there's no reason why when we have a document set, we couldn't have as one of the properties, if I just say view properties, there could be a person in there which is a bid leader or tender manager, and then we can notify them of any changes to any documentation, or notify them that the submission date is only 7 days in advance, using all of that SharePoint document management and task control and workflows and all of that good stuff. So,
Tony, I'll just come in here. We've got a couple of questions come up which you may want to either look at now or a little bit later, but just seeing as we're sort of free riding through through SharePoint here. Previously, you just showed when you created that folder for emails that you could then put emails into that folder. So could you perhaps just show us how we can save an email to a SharePoint folder?
Yeah, I'll have to open my email, which might be a bit dangerous. But if the email at the top says P45 or something like that, then the webinar will finish immediately, and I'll go and play golf. So, right, there are, you can, right, let's just pick some. So I've got one here. We'll just keep something which from LinkedIn. You can simply, if you want to, just say, right, I want to do save as, and then navigate through SharePoint. Okay. It's going to ask me to log in now, because I hadn't logged in. Oops, sorry. In fact, that's not where I wanted to be. SharePoint sites. In fact, I haven't got this one connected to it, but I'll just show the principle. You can just do file save as, and as one of your locations on the left-hand side here, have a shortcut to SharePoint and just navigate through and drop it into a particular document library in a site. If you're doing that a lot, and we have a lot of clients who use this application, and again, I'm going to open up my email here. is if you look at applications such as Caligo, Caligo allows you to display SharePoint sites within the Outlook side menu here, which I'm scrolling up and down. And then you can basically just take an email and just drag and drop it across. Okay. Outlook doesn't provide that functionality out of the box with SharePoint. Microsoft just haven't got around to doing that yet. So there's not only Caligo, there's a number of these applications available. If I just open up caligo.com. So they have email management, and see if we've got a not very big screenshot, but down here is showing how you can drag and drop emails from Outlook directly into SharePoint locations. It will also pull through various email metadata and apply it into the document library inside SharePoint, so who the email was from, maybe what the subject was, etc., etc. So there are some really good email management solutions out there which integrate with SharePoint. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Another question here for you. You were talking about metadata just then and also previously. Can you add metadata to documents inside the document set, or is it just set at document set level, if that makes sense?
No, you can have these columns here, the client name, the submission date, contract value, etc., etc. I've only got these applied to the welcome page. We can have other metadata and apply it to the documents inside the document set. So yes, there are two types of metadata inside a document set. Those which you can have on the title page or the welcome page, and you can have completely separate ones on the, in effect, the document library element of the document set.
Fabulous, thank you, Tony. Keep those questions coming. I'll let you crack on.
Okay. So yeah, so that was really just an example of how you might take SharePoint and use it to manage your tenders, I suppose. Seems it's called tender management. So, you know, there is so much to SharePoint. There are so many different ways we can approach different requirements. And I thought that was just would be a good example, is to say, well, you know, the last 4 weeks we've just really talked about simple document libraries, but hidden behind this functionality is some really, really useful, you know, clever stuff around better managing information and documents.
So Tony, just whilst we're still talking about tender management, before you move on to the engineering example we were going to look at, one of our delegates looks great, by the way, so there we go, good compliment for you. How could we export for the customer to submit to them?
If the person who submitted that, when you say export, are we talking about how we can allow client access into the information?
I'll tell you what we'll do, actually. Let's just have a quick look here.
I'll close that down.
Actually, I think actually the person who asked that question, here we go, has typed quicker than I could get her to speak. To allow client access, yes.
Right, okay. I'm just going to check. Yeah, you can share at a document set level. Okay. So what we could do here is just come in and say, okay, well, I want to share this, okay, with fred.smith@tsg.com, and that would then send a link to that person so they could actually just access that document set or that tender pack. So they wouldn't be able to get into any other tenders which you're working on. Um, so that's how you would do it. And I think we mentioned this in one of the previous webinars that all that end user would need would be a Microsoft Live ID assigned to their email address, and then they could come in and do that.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right. Any more questions around that?
No,
Right.
just people happy with the answers you've been giving so far.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Right. So one of the other requests was from a company in the south of England. Don't know why I said that, but who have a number of engineers who are going out and servicing and repairing, I suppose we could say, central heating systems and ARGAs and things like that. And they were saying, is there a mechanism where our engineers could fill data out, fill data in, when they're outside the office and have that information posted back. So what I thought would be good is just really as a reminder as well, all I'm going to do is create a SharePoint list which holds the data. This particular company's requirement as well is for offline access to the information. So we would need to utilize something like Nintex for Office 365 to provide that offline capability. I know we had some problems last week just while we're on this with our webcam, which basically didn't work. So what we did following the webinars, we videoed some use of offline forms on mobile phones and iPads. And Hazel, our sort of video lady, has spliced those into the webinar. So it might be worthwhile going back and viewing last week's video webinar recording online, and you'll be able to see that. Okay. So right, let's show you how we go about building this. So what I'm going to do is just use a custom list, and we'll see these are our engineer, we'll call them service reports. Okay, so I think we covered this I think it was the third webinar about using sort of forms and workflow. But what we need to do is basically build the fields which we want people to fill in. So if we go to our engineer service reports and go to our settings, then just as a reminder, columns are the fields which we use inside SharePoint. So we'll just keep it simple. We'll say, okay, well, we need them to tell us who the customer was. We'll create another column, which was the date of visit. So we'll make that a date and time. Again, we'll make it mandatory, and we'll say we want the date and time. We'll say work undertaken. Oops. We'll make that multiple lines of text. Again, we'll make it mandatory. What I'm going to do here is say, well, I'm going to ask a question. Did you parts used? We'll make that a yes, no. We'll say that's no as default. Parts information. Now again, I'm just keeping this fairly simple. We could a bit more. I'll have a couple who will say, how long were you on site? So we'll make that a number. Put a little description on, please enter in minutes. We put a minimum on there and say, well, you can't log anything less than 30 minutes. We might create another one just to say, what was the mileage to get there. So again, we'll have a number. We'll OK that. So if we now go to our engineer service reports, let's just make it look a little bit easier on the eye a second before we do that. Okay. So obviously this is inside SharePoint at the moment. So if I say I want to add a new item, then we'll say who was the customer. So we'll say it was Ed Miliband. He hasn't got much to do now, has he? Oops, can't even spell his name. What was the date of the visit? So we'll say it was today at 9 o'clock. What work did we undertake? We fixed an oil leak on his Arga. Did we use any parts? Now the reason I've done that is what we could do is actually have it so that if they click parts used, then parts information would become active. If they weren't, then we mightn't actually show that parts information. But what it could also do is that when the form is submitted back and it says parts used, we could have a workflow which actually takes the information we put in parts information and maybe emails it to the company's procurement team or stock manager to go away and order replacement parts for stock purposes or something like that. So we'll just say 1 times 56 GT FD RW oil seal, and 2 times, it's going to annoy me, GT blah 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 blah, pipe fitting. How long was I on site? See, I was on site 12 minutes and it was a round trip of 47 miles. And if I hit save, it'll say, right, well, you can't have 12 minutes on site, you've got to put a minimum of 30. So this is what we call the British gas scenario. So, and then we can just save that. Okay, so that's the information just literally being fed back into SharePoint. I just need to quickly check something on here because I'm not sure if I'm just going to add in-text forms. And then I'll show you how we can then take that form and make it mobile compliant. So we'll just have to wait until that's submitted. Any more questions, Will? Just putting Will under a bit of pressure.
Yes, there are actually. I was going to say this for later, but seeing as you're hungry, whilst we're waiting for this to happen, Tony.
Which has now happened.
Okay, we'll let you go then, and we'll come back in a bit if you want.
I'll come back to the questions because I was just waiting for that to install, and I thought I'd fill some time in, but it's installed. Okay, so this is our engineer service reports. At the moment, we can only submit these whilst we have a connection to SharePoint. I mean, that doesn't mean to say we couldn't be doing it via a tablet with an internet connection, but it has no offline capability at the moment. So what we can do is using in-text forms is create a mobile version of this form. So it's just loading it in. Okay. So just for the people who weren't on sort of last week's webinar, this is the application we use to create different versions of forms for SharePoint lists. So at the moment, I've just got a desktop version of this form. Okay, now how we move things about is literally just drag and drop. So if I wanted to say, okay, well, my engineers use a smartphone or an iPad or Windows tablet or anything like that, and I could just say, okay, well, I want to create a version for a smartphone, right? And it goes away and has a first stab at it. Okay, if I wanted to get rid of the Nintex logo, I can do that. I can drag the customer field up a little bit and make a little bit of a space there. I can double click on that. Okay. Highlight the customer, might change the color, to red or something like that, and make it bold. Okay. And basically just modify the thing, the form. The end user would download the Nintex mobile app, which is free of charge for his device, put in his credentials, and then he would be able to fill this form in from that device, whether he's online or offline. Whilst we're in here, we can actually preview. So we could say, well, show me the form as it looks on the smartphone. And basically that's how it would look on the phone. You wouldn't get all of this format and stuff on it. Okay, and what you can see as well is that we can also add attachments. So on the phone, we can say, when we say add attachment, it just activates the device's camera function. We can take a camera, take a picture, and attach that to the form, and you can have multiple attachments if need be. Okay. If I wanted to create an iPad one, or an Android tablet, and we just say that, and then again we could start to move things around as well. So we could say, well, I want customer, move that over there, put the data visit up here as well, move that control to wherever we wanted it. So it's very easy just to customize your form layout using Nintex forms, and that is currently the only mechanism to allow you to have offline access to SharePoint forms is via a third-party application such as Nintex. I'm sure at some time in the future Microsoft will make some form of offline form available from SharePoint. Okay. So if we just close that. Okay, and that's how we would go about building a sort of an engineer service reports type of application.
Great, thank you, Tony. We'll go back to that question I said we had earlier. I think we were just about at the end of where we wanted to be today. So if you do have questions, now's the time to start asking them. This is more of a support-based question for you, Tony. So this is Ask Tony. One of our delegates has an issue when they create lists in SharePoint with the columns and the date field. If they set a workflow in Designer or an alert on SharePoint, it sends the email alert at 12:01 in the middle of the night. So if anyone had a mobile on then, they'd be alerted, possibly wake them up, or even forget about it come the morning. So
yeah,
what can we do to stop that?
Within SharePoint Designer, you could put a pause. So if the workflow activates at midnight, then put a pause for 8 hours before you send the email. There's one way of doing it.
Okay, dokes.
Yeah. Or trying to think of another way of doing it. No, it would probably have to be put a pause in there.
So they always set them as immediately
Yeah.
at the very
Yeah.
beginning of that day.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And then say don't send the email for 8 hours. So I'll show if I can just while we're if I just put an in-text. I mean, you can do this with SharePoint Designer. It's just easier for me to show you via an in-text workflow. Was that the last question, Will, was it? Oh, no. Will's been laughing at me this morning because I had a technical catastrophe last night when I realised 20 minutes after my mobile phone had fell into the sink full of water that it had fallen into the sink full of water. So I spent all morning trying to get my new phone to work. So, and believe me, a bucket full of rice doesn't work. So, right. Okay, so if we looked at the workflow side of it, I don't know the exact sort of how this person's built the workflow, but if I was to say, you know, pause until a particular date, so if I just configure that, and on this one I can say, right, pause until the current item's date of visit. So that's in effect, I think this person's sort of their workflow starts on a particular date, i.e., you know, the 1st of January. So at 1 minute past 12 on the 1st of January, the workflow is going to start.